large. We are excited about this next panel. Freedom is a constant struggle, building political power. To moderate this panel and to lead us in conversation is none other than Ms. Stephanie Lynn Young, Managing Director for Culture, Communications, and Media Partnerships at When We All Vote, who will lead us in a conversation that examines what it means to build political power and highlight strategies for getting it done. Before we start, just a friendly reminder to text JusticeCon to 31996. JusticeCon to 31996. Someone hop it in the chats so folks can remember 31996. JusticeCon. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephen.
Take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. I know that this day has not only been historic, having the first virtual event like this, celebrating Juneteenth, and in this moment in our country, we can all use the inspiration and information to come together to figure out how we can take action in a multitude of different ways. I would like to introduce the panelists who will be joining us today as we talk about building Black political power. So through tactics like gerrymandering and voter suppression, Black communities have historically been denied fair access to the democratic process by the very institutions responsible for including us and protecting us and supporting us. And as a result, Black people are underrepresented in elected office, even though in 2018 we saw the most women elected in Congress and the most diverse Congress that we've ever had, but we are still underrepresented in elected office. And those offices control budgets, agendas, policies that impact us all, and help us to build real political power. So this conversation will discuss what it means to build that power at the state and local level, and highlight all the civic engagement strategies and explore immediate actions needed to support communities implementing power building measures. And for the organization that I work with, When We All Vote, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization launched by Michelle Obama in 2018, we're on a mission to change the culture around voting. And in that mission, we also want to see and close the race and age gap of those who actually show up to the polls and increase voter participation in each and every election. And what I want to say, just kind of kicking things off before I introduce the panel, is that voting is the first step. It's usually from activism, from protests to the ballot box, to holding your elected officials accountable, to staying engaged, and to pushing the agenda forward. So we are in for a great treat. We have a wonderful panel joining us today. Dr. Wes Bellamy, who is the creator of Black Millennial Convention. We also have Miss Stephanie Brown James, a good friend of mine. She is the co-founder and chair of the Collective PAC. And then we also have Pastor Mike McBride. I had the opportunity to work with him at the White House. He is the director of urban strategies at Live Free. And last but not least, we were just on another panel yesterday, Mr. Rashad Robinson, who is the executive director of Color of Change. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning, and happy Juneteenth.
Thanks, Steph.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth. I personally learned about Juneteenth when I lived in Texas. It was not something that I grew up celebrating. So I learned about that history. So it's really encouraging to see that this is a lesson for everybody, and people are really taking this moment to reflect. So I want to start off with this first kind of open floor question. Black people have been shut out of the political processes for years, and that disenfranchisement has created a sort of cynicism around politics and a distrust in our government for many Black people. So I think it's important that we start this conversation off by exploring what political power really means. What do you all see, I guess, what are the critical or key components of political power? And I think I'd like to start with Steph.
Sure. Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hey, fellas, good to see y'all. We usually see each other on the road working, but it's a pleasure to see y'all here. And just thank you to Reverend Green and Allen Cathedral for having this important convening. When we at the Collective think about building Black political power, and I must say, when we started the Collective in 2016, there was not a lot of conversations around building Black political power. Because I think we saw our power only in a few key lanes. It was around voting and voting registration. But as we have seen with so many protests and so many injustices that have happened around the country, what I believe people are really opening their eyes to see is that we have to be able to change the policies and the laws that are in place that continue to uphold systematic racism in this country. And in order to change the laws, we must change the lawmakers. And so our power in that process as Black people has to be twofold. At the collective, we believe that power is in the forms of both organized people and organized money. And so I actually don't think that we've been left out of the political process. I think we haven't been playing it as a power player to show the true strength that we have in both our organizing efforts and the way in which we secure resources to make sure that we are tackling the fact that we have unequal representation in our political process. The fact that there's only 55 Black members in Congress out of 535 is a problem. The fact that over 90% of all elected officials in this country are white is a problem. And finally, the fact that 95% of all prosecutors, the most important role oftentimes in the criminal justice system, are white, and many of them white men, that's a problem. And so our opportunity right now is to make sure that we are leveraging our organization as a people and that we're organizing our money, and I'll get to that later, to make sure that we are fully operationalizing the power that we have as voters, as Black people, as leaders in this process.
Dr. West, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. And again, I echo the statements of our sister Stephanie. We always normally see each other on the road, but it's good to see you all virtually right now. I would agree with Stephanie's last point, specifically revolving around we haven't been left outside of the process. I think there, to a certain extent, has to be a philosophical shift to us thinking about how we own our own political capital and our own power. I know there are several different institutions and organizations who are working, i.e. Collective PAC, Color of Change, and others, who are working diligently to ensure that our folks are aware not only of our political power, but what we do with it and making substantial change on the local, state, and federal level. For me, in my perspective as a former local elected official and the former vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, I think it's imperative that there is a large emphasis on those local positions, i.e. your city council, your mayor, your district attorney, and in some cases, your judges, because we see on a local basis, there's the opportunity to make an immediate impact in your community tomorrow based off of who you elect or who you choose to not elect. So when we don't go out and vote, essentially, in my opinion, we're giving a vote to those who don't have our interest. When we don't, take the political process seriously, or we say, I'm not going to show up for jury duty, I'm going to duck that, or I don't care about voting, nothing is going to change for me. We're essentially giving our vote to those who do not care about us. So when we look at, again, the philosophical shift specifically revolving around capitalizing on our power, I think in today's climate, there is an opportunity for us to really grab a hold of what we want to do and think outside of the box. Do we have to be beholden to one particular party? Is there a way for us to coalesce and corral our own collective energy to push forward with our own specific agendas and what we want to see on a local, state, and federal level? And I think there is, and I think there's some synergy around that, specifically with the folks on this panel and those who will be speaking afterwards, but it's just all about how we do it. So that's kind of my take.
Thanks, Dr. Rashad, I'd like to go to you next.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Reverend Green. Thank you to my friends who I'm seeing virtually. Like I keep saying, that I feel like I'm going to a lot of places to speak, but not leaving this chair in order to do it. And so I am also looking forward at some point to getting on the road and actually being in fellowship and community with you all in person. It is an honor to be here talking about these issues of power any day, but particularly on Juneteenth Day, which is not necessarily the celebration of freedom, but the celebration of the struggle towards freedom. And I think that that's important because we have to recognize that the pathway to freedom wasn't simply about someone releasing us from bondage or us realizing we were released from bondage, but all the ways in which bondage and all the ways in which the rules sort of impact us in so many different ways. And that's actually how I think about power. And that's how we think about power at Color of Change. It is the ability to change the rules. Sometimes they are the written rules of policy. Other times they're the unwritten rules of culture. When Color of Change was founded 15 years ago, it was in the aftermath of a flood, which was Hurricane Katrina. And it was caused by bad decision makers, and it turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. Black folks were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something, and they were left to die. And the thing about Katrina that's important to remember is that it illustrated things that people already knew: geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we've done to our planet, and so many other systems, and the ways in which structural racism undergirds all of it. But at the heart of that, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. And when institutions are not nervous about disappointing your community, it doesn't matter what kind of research report you have that illustrates all the facts and figures. It doesn't matter what you do in the courts if you don't have the power to implement it. It doesn't matter what folks build in Silicon Valley. You can't code your way or research your way or legal your way or even nonprofit executive direct your way out of those problems. You actually need the ability to channel people power and narrative change in order to force people in power to do things that they don't want to do. And as we think about power, it has to constantly be at that North Star about what does it mean to change the rules, so we do not accept charitable solutions to structural problems. People sending water bottles to Flint instead of cleaning up the pipes, doing service days at inner city schools instead of actually dealing with the tax structure that leaves our schools in austerity. That is how we have to think about power, and that is the standard we have to accept if we are going to raise the floor on what's acceptable and push up the ceiling on what's possible.
Thank you, Rashad. And when I think about what you said about people not being afraid, I hearken back to when President Obama gave one of his addresses to Congress, and Joe Wilson stood up and said, "You lie."
Yeah.
And the fact that you could do that and you felt like it didn't matter, and that you could tear a Black man down, no matter if he's the president of the United States, just shows how emboldened some people are. And when people also say that he was going to be a one-term president and that was their only goal, that also shows you how emboldened people are, and they're not afraid. They don't care. Pastor Mike, I'd like you to weigh in on this, please.
Yeah, it's great to be with everyone as well, and much respect to my friend Stephen and all those who've helped pull this together. I'll just echo and agree and say amen to everything folks have already said. I was taught that disorganized truth will find it difficult to defeat an organized lie. And so our problem is not that we don't have power. Our problem is mostly that we are just not organized well enough to push back against the forces of centuries of coordinated attacks against our humanity, against our infrastructure, and certainly against our families. And so I certainly want to emphasize that one of the ways that we not only build power but sustain power is to invest and support our institutions. We cannot beat systems through individuality or individual exploits. Our systems, our infrastructures, our institutions are the very lifeblood. Those institutions keep us connected to a historical legacy of resistance and liberation. And so certainly as a pastor and a faith leader, the Black church continues to be one of the most foremost and important institutions in the Black community. And our ability to leverage this institution, to organize this institution, to unleash the beast of liberation that is this institution, allows us to be able to mobilize everyday people to solve these problems that persist across generation. And so as it relates to this particular day of Juneteenth and the struggles that we have moving forward, we are always extremely glad through the efforts we do at the Black Church PAC or through our Live Free work to believe that our institutions hold within them the power to defeat white supremacy. One could argue that the Black church has 400 years of receipts of waking up every day to let white supremacy know that on our watch, you will have a formidable opponent. And so as we move together, may we move together trusting in our institutions, whether they are civic, social, whether they are nonprofit, whether they are organizing, whether they are cultural, certainly our religious institutions. Let's continue to believe in that which our ancestors have bequeathed to us in our hands and steward it towards the liberation that awaits our arrival.
Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. As a daughter of a liberation theologist, I could not agree more. And as an A.M.E, I could not agree more, as our church was born out of protest. And Absolutely. We believe that our faith is through our action and the way in which we help to change this country and move it forward. Rashad, I'd like to come to you with the next question. So Color of Change is the largest digital advocacy organization in America. What's working in your efforts to mobilize Black America for political engagement? And what do we need to do to increase the share of Black people within the electorate from your perspective?
Well, thank you for that. And I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said, but I really appreciate what Pastor Mike just said about this idea of the individual versus the infrastructure. And infrastructure is so critically important because I do think back to this idea of power. Far too often we mistake presence for power, visibility, awareness, retweets, shout outs from the stage. We have a large Twitter following, so I have power, but you have presence. And that's why we talk about it as the ability to change the rules, because when we mistake presence for power, we think we've done something that we haven't actually done. Presence is important, but as you just said, Stephanie, if we're out thinking about power, someone could shout down a Black president because we may have thought that a Black president means that we actually got to the point where we were ending structural racism, when structural racism only comes out in deeper ways. And that is why infrastructure is so important, because we don't want to think that a Black celebrity that is famous and stops the internet when they make an announcement means that America loves Black people as much as it loves Black culture. It can hate Black people and love Black culture at the same time. And so what we are doing is trying to channel that energy into real change. And so, if I would have been here 4 weeks ago, I would have said 1.7 million people have taken action with Color of Change in the last 8 months. And 4 weeks ago, that would have made us the largest online racial justice organization in the country, with an ability to actually channel that energy into local elections. We've built a framework around district attorney work around the country, building the only searchable database of the 2,400 prosecutors, and being able to work across the movement to develop 6 clear demands to be able to challenge that energy. And so going to winningjustice.org or colorofchange.org, you can look up your prosecutor, you can get education material and demands. And part of that means that we are trying to channel energy of outrage into the ways in which we can affect and impact the system. We are holding corporations accountable with a deep sort of understanding that corporations simply can't say Black Lives Matter. They have to make Black Lives Matter. And that means we have to have clear demands for how they actually engage in the public space. And so we don't take direct corporate contributions. And as a result, we run campaigns every single day across big tech, banking, and all these other factors to push these corporations to actually change their policies and practices. And so 4 weeks ago, that 1.7 million folks was winning all sorts of campaigns, from getting Bill O'Reilly canceled from Fox, to electing reform-minded district attorneys, to changing the rules for big tech companies like Airbnb and Facebook, and channeling advertisers to do better with their money. Now, 4 weeks later, we have had a huge influx of people who want to move from awareness to action. Over 7 million people have now taken action with Color of Change in the last 8 months. That is an unprecedented level of new energy. It is a new energy that actually some of the membership looks a little whiter than previous sort of engagement. And we are focused on really how do we channel people into very strategic things. And so you will never see a campaign, never see an email from Color of Change that says, tell Donald Trump to stand up for affirmative action. Because there's no amount of petitions or campaigns that we could have people sign that will get him to sign up. I'm respectful. Trying to get him to stand up for affirmative action. What you will see from us is strategic campaigns that help to build power for Black folks, that help to channel that energy into real wins, and then channel that energy into what will be the largest grassroots Black-led mobilization program in the country, where all around the country, tens of thousands of volunteers will be working to change the sort of base of who turns out to the election, focusing on low propensity voters and engaging volunteers, that's you, if you sign up, to join us both online and offline, hopefully, if we can get back to the doors, to reach voters and to engage them from district attorney on up, with a deep recognition that voting is one piece of our civic engagement puzzle. I'd like to think of it as the stretching and an exercise analogy. If losing that last 5 pounds is your goal, it's not all of our goal, but if that's your goal, stretching alone is not going to help you do that. But if you don't stretch, you're going to hurt later. And so we have to vote, but we also have to do all the other things. We have to protest, we have to show up, we have to push. All of those things have to be part of the work to build power. And so that is what we're doing at Color of Change. That's how we're trying to channel this new level of energy, and we're doing it in collaboration with organizations like the Movement for Black Lives, with local grassroots organizations, with national organizations, with a deep recognition that there is many roles for all of us to play, and building power will require us to reach as many people as possible and give them the most strategic ways to make their voices heard.
Thanks, Rashad. I would have to add that in building power, people have to understand their power, and in engaging in our system, you have to understand what our system is. So it's so important, the work that you're doing, Dr. Bellamy, when it comes to your work as a professor of political science. How could you add to this with the work that you do in helping students, A, understand how our government works, and B, helping them realize the power that we all have individually, right? And also collectively together.
Well, I think that's a great point. And first of all, it's hard to follow Brother Robinson with anything that he says. So, either with the top hat or his powerful commentary, like I don't like going after him. So don't do that. Don't make me do that anymore, really, after any of these folks. But in all seriousness, when we're talking about not only educating our young folk, which we do every day at Virginia State University, and especially in my department as the political science department chair, but we also do this in our communities when we're talking about why civic engagement actually is important and then how it works. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation when you look online, and when people think that they're in tune and tapped into what's going on politically, there's just such a large emphasis on the national level. And then there's still misinformation in regards to how bills actually work, what are the differences between the House and the Senate, and why certain things can't get passed. So we place a major emphasis on breaking down the correlation between local politics, state politics, and federal politics, and then the three branches, because unfortunately, although we may have seen that cartoon when we were little, I'm a Bill, a lot of us have forgotten that as we get older. So we try to place a large emphasis again on breaking that down. But I want to touch on something else. And I think that when you heard, or what you heard from my dear sister Stephanie, as well as my brother Rashad, as well as Pastor Mike, and we're talking about, to a certain extent, in different lanes, all of us coalescing power and empowering our people, there is power in that. So I'll be candid. Like, I can't do what Rashad does. I can't do what Stephanie and Quentin do. I can't do what Pastor Mike does, but I can do what I do. And especially when I was in office, I can write policy. I can push to get it passed. That's my role. If my role right now is to be a department chairman, I can shepherd our young people to get them civically engaged. That's my job. And I think that we have to commit ourselves to understanding that in this larger movement, there is a role for each and every single one of us. And the more we work together, the better off our people will be. Lastly, I will say that I see a lot more of that happening. And I don't know if it's a generational thing or whatever the case may be, but I know all of our panelists, like I just spoke to Quentin, Stephanie's husband, last week, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of weeks ago. Rashad and I, it seems like we talk all the time in another chat. So, it's like we do work together. And I think we also need to share that, because there's power in us letting people know that we aren't disorganized. We're not disenfranchised from each other. We don't work in silos. We work together. We like each other. We elevate and we support each other. And that's another part of our power as a people.
I think that's so important what you said, roles, because I think that sometimes in this country, it feels like there's painting one way is to be Black. This is a broad stroke. This is the best way to be Black. This is the best way to be an activist. This is the best way to contribute. And at the end of the day, we have to be everywhere. We have to be in the streets, but we also have to be in the system. We also have to be raising the money and pushing, the needle forward. And we also have to be in the pulpit. So at the end of the day, like, everybody plays a role in this puzzle. And I think us as Black people, we have to recognize that. And I think that we should all be more encouraging, and I think too respectful of everybody's role in this movement going forward. So thank you for that. And speaking of roles, Steph, you have a role with Collective PAC, and you're working to create political equity every day. And we want to know, what successes and challenges have you seen? And what help do Black people still need in this moment, especially Black women, to see themselves in electoral politics? I know you just were at Emily's list as well, which is building Black political power. Well, not Black, but building political power for women. So would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, and I can't let the conversation go about everyone having a role. I think that is so important because people need to feel empowered. They need to feel hopeful. They need to feel as though they can have an impact. And what I've been thinking about a lot is that, and I think this is the appropriate place to say it on this type of forum, is, when we allow ourselves to be positioned by God for our purpose and not for other people's pleasure or agenda, we can be as powerful as He wants us to be, and He will place us where we need to be. And I really think that that's the time and space. I think that's the time and place in which we're in, is that, we keep talking about Black Lives Matter. We know that we matter as a form of significance as human beings. But I think about physics and the actual form of being matter. And matter is a substance that takes up mass, and it takes up space, and it has volume. And so in this moment, it is upon us to take up our role as a physical being of matter in the political process and in the political space. And so then that means that, yes, we have to have equity in our political representation, because we have to represent for our communities. And so I love that Wes is talking about the system. Most people don't know how the system operates. And so if I don't know how the system operates, I don't know what my role is in the system. So I'm not understanding that, one, most decisions will be made on a local and state level that impact your day-to-day life. How your water comes, how your trash is collected, the textbooks in your kids' schools, those are local and state decisions. We talk about police reform. Well, if a police chief decides on what happens in the police district office that he oversees, and we understand that the mayor is the person that puts the police chief in office, we are the ones that vote for the mayor. So in the system, we actually have the most power. And the only kind of challenge I have with, I don't have a challenge. I agree with what Rashad is saying. I do think that voting process is extremely important. It's the first step in order for us to execute our power and hopefully vote for people that are going to be the lawmakers to change the laws. And so to get to your question, I'm going to wrap up fast, Steph, is that, one of the opportunities I see is that we're now seeing Black people win political office everywhere. You look at Lauren Underwood, you look at Lucy McBath. These are two women who won their congressional seats running for the first time in majority white districts. That is a testament to how far we have come in our political process. And we have to continue to support candidates who are working to advance an agenda that will progress the Black community. And so, if anything, I think we need to focus on how can we change the structure within the party to understand that we have to be empowered to run for office, but most importantly, we have to be funded to run. Because in those same women that I mentioned that were running for Congress, on average, Black women that run for Congress against compared to white women receive $1 million less than their white counterpart that's running. But yet the studies have shown that when a white man and a white woman runs for office, they have exactly the same shot at winning as a Black man or a Black woman running. And so we as a people have to see that we, again, can fit in the spectrum of political power in a lot of ways, from voting to running for office. Because, again, in order to change the laws that we need to progress our community, we have to be able to change those who write the laws. And those people should reflect the communities in which they come from, especially the Black community.
I couldn't agree more. And when we all vote, one thing that we have started doing is trying to really connect this moment to voting, because people always are disconnected with saying, well, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect me. And I can't really see how voting impacts my life. So in this moment, where we're seeing issues with, obviously, continual issues with police brutality and violence, and huge inequities in our justice system, we're trying to tie this moment into how, just what you just said, your mayor appoints your police chief, right? You actually can vote for your sheriff or the district attorney that Rashad is talking about. So at the end of the day, this is literally at our fingertips. And we, unfortunately, as people being brutalized and targeted and terrorized for centuries, have really been made to feel and believe that it actually doesn't matter and voting doesn't really impact your life. And they want you to think that. So we are falling for, and some of us are falling for, the biggest trick of voter suppression in the book. And it's up to us to beat that drum as much as possible. And I know that's what you're doing, Pastor Mike, with Live Free. And I want you to talk about some of the work that you're doing there and how you're talking about voting to the folks in your organization, to the people in your congregation, to young people, and try to make the connection to this moment of really craziness that we find ourselves in.
No, absolutely. I'll just want to emphasize that governance, the ability to govern in cities and counties, must become just as critical as voting. We find that if the elected officials who govern our cities cannot solve problems, they do not have the ability to make ideas stand up in the public square through policies on the local level, then bad governance becomes de facto voter suppression. It creates a level of apathy by the citizen to engage in the ability to cast your ballot with confidence, knowing that whoever is in office will fight for my family or the ideas that actually make my day-to-day life better. A lot of our work in Live Free has been about how do we address the material conditions of Black people in cities across the country that are over-policed, that are experiencing daily realities related to gun violence in urban communities, neighbor to neighbor violence particularly. And what we have found is that our work allows us to solve problems by scaling up public health gun violence prevention interventions that give people the confidence to be able to champion these ideas as issue-based campaigns embedded in electoral candidates and processes. We think that our work around voting has to move beyond candidates, and it has to be grounded in issue-based campaigns and larger framings around the quality of life that are impacting people every day in our communities. Too often, voting is essentialized in a candidate or a campaign, and then when we get disappointed with the candidate or the campaign, we check out. We want to be able to say that expanding democracy is about being engaged not just on voting day, but then showing up immediately after voting day to the city council meeting, to the school board meeting, helping to implement and scale up these life-saving interventions. If we continue to exercise the muscle of civic engagement, then voting is an easier thing to activate because the muscle is not atrophied because it only gets a workout every 4 years. And so we believe that our work then as organizers on the ground in multiple cities across the country is about building the capacity of people to believe that the government is theirs, even at the local level. The solutions to save lives is in your hand, even at the local level. The ability to make your local budgets a moral document is in your hands, even at the local level. And the elected officials that we elect every 2 to 4 years then are carrying out the will of the people, not coming to make promises that will never be materialized. And so our work then is 365 days a year. It is not at cycles of presidential elections, but every time there is an election, we want to have issue-based campaigns fueling the driving of people to the polls, knowing that it will impact their material conditions.
And that's such a good point because it is a cultural problem, right? And I'm talking about American cultural problem, not a Black cultural problem. And when we all vote, we're trying to change the culture around voting so people understand that it's bigger than one person, one moment, one election. We like to fall in love with a candidate and then we fall back. And we have to do more than that. We cannot just focus on an image that pumps us up and gets us fired up and ready to go, but we have to make sure that we're invested holistically. So I'd like us to just do a round robin and give the viewers and folks participating with us today one, 2, or 3, just depends on what you would like to do. What can they do right now to take action and to harness their political power? And I'd like to start with, I'll start with Rashad.
Great. So, I run a civil rights organization that helps you do something real about injustice. So the first thing I'm going to say is join Color of Change, get involved in a local Color of Change squad, take action on the things that we are working on. The second thing I'm going to say is that this is something we can all sort of start doing. I think that we have to start saying from a messaging and narrative perspective what we actually mean. And we do a number of things that I think both Black folks and allies do that I think puts emphasis in the wrong ways. And so we will talk about Black folks as vulnerable, Black communities as vulnerable. Black communities are not vulnerable. We've been attacked. We have been targeted. We've been exploited. When we talk about Black communities as vulnerable, we have people from a social service perspective that spend all their time and energy trying to fix us and our families rather than fixing the systems that have exploited and harmed us. We will say Black people are less likely to get loans from the banks instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. We will say Black people are less likely to get hired by tech companies instead of saying tech companies are less likely to hire Black people. And why is this important? Because what we end up with, back to this idea of charitable solutions to structural problems, we will have people trying to mentor us out of racism rather than fixing the systems that have systemically excluded us. We will have people doing financial literacy programs instead of dealing a blow to the banks that have, from the very beginning, exploited our communities, targeted us, redlined us, and then stolen our homes when we've even done the sort of work to even get them. If we do not say the things that we actually mean, we end up getting the false sort of solutions to the problems. And the final thing I will say is that we are in this moment where we are talking about a lot of Black pain. We are seeing it on TV. We are seeing it across social media space. We are seeing all the ways in which disparities are clear, from COVID to policing to so many other things. And we are becoming more aware of those things. And I think that that is important. But I also think it's incredibly important that we just don't talk about Black pain, but we talk about Black joy. And Black joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration. Not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. Because Black people are the protagonists in the American story of voting. And so just telling Black folks to vote is not enough, because no one has fought harder, stood on longer lines, pushed harder to make voting real. No one in this country has fought harder to be educated against threats, attacks, violence. So Black people are the protagonists in that story. And so we need to unleash the stories of Black brilliance, Black creativity through the COVID crisis. No community did more from a essential worker perspective to getting us through, created more amazing and culturally creative spaces on social media and Instagram Live. And so one thing that we can all start doing is telling the story, the real story about who we are, so we get the emphasis on the right solutions to deal with the problem, the right direction on the targets that actually need the energy focused on them. And we can stop trying to fix our families and start fixing the systems and the structures that have exploited us, unlocking all the potential, investing in our communities, and divesting from policing. Those are the things that we can actually do. And I believe that we can also play a role in telling that story in a new way. So join Color of Change, and let's start telling the story to build the power for the things we want to change.
Thanks, Rashad. Pastor Mike, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I believe that the biggest and greatest thing we can do in this moment is organize. Organize, organize, organize. We often tell our folks, use a 10-10-10 plan. Find 10 people that you can contact in the next 10 hours and commit to doing an action in the next 10 days that allows you then to see a result in the next 10 weeks. Sometimes we build these kind of opportunities to change the world, and we don't have a framework that is an easy on-ramp for people to get engaged and join in the movement, the revolution, however you would like to describe it. And so we like to encourage you not only to organize the people that you know, but organize the institutions that you are a part of. Organize them to show up in public spaces with a shared agenda, a shared vision. Donate to these institutions. Black institutions are most likely the least funded, and have the most fragile infrastructure. So don't give your money to Red Cross and all these other, big institutions when you got Color of Change, you got Collective, you got Live Free, you got all these other Black-led organizations that are literally fighting to dismantle white supremacy every single day they wake up. Do everything that you can to take your 2 mites, your few dollars, and put it in the offering plate, but also send a Cash App and a Venmo and all these kind of donations so people can have the money to actually resource and expand the power of people to organize themselves and to turn up. And the last thing that I'll say is be gentle with yourself. We are indeed dealing with multiple pandemics at the same time. The pandemic of white supremacy and racial hierarchy is 400 years long, and it is a stubborn pandemic. We're dealing with the pandemic of COVID. both 19 and 45. Both of these we hope to defeat within the next 6 months and usher in an opportunity for healing, rebuilding, and reimagination. And certainly in this moment, we are dealing with the pandemic of racialized and brutal policing. And I will just say to you right now, the HEROES Act is coming out of Congress with hundreds of millions of dollars being sent to police without any form of accountability or strings attached. Call your elected official today and tell them that at least half of those resources need to be put in communities that are dealing with food, housing, that are scaling up gun violence prevention strategies. Right now, as that money leaves the Congress over the next month, let's let our voices heard and demonstrate that the ability to defund and reallocate resources is not just a local fight, but it must be a federal fight. And elected officials, even who are Democrats, cannot tell Black people they love us, but then give us pennies whenever they have the opportunity to break a brother, a sister, a loved one off for the everyday tax dollar that we spend. Fight for your loved ones, fight for the oppressed, fight for the marginalized, and do all that you can to keep loving yourself. God will get the glory and victory shall be ours.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. I'd like to go to Dr. Bellamy next.
Sure. Thank you once again. And the first thing that I'll say in terms of helping, please go and donate to the Collective PAC. They're doing an absolutely phenomenal job of training Black candidates. As you see, their leadership is steadfast. I would also encourage all of our brothers and sisters who are watching to go and donate to Color of Change. You can literally just put in Color of Change or the Collective PAC in Google, do your Googles, and there'll be an opportunity for you to donate and support these great efforts if you want to do something immediately. I would also encourage and implore everyone to go and look up the Black Futures Lab. There's a phenomenal policy agenda there for Black folk, for everyone to go and review if you really want to look at how a comprehensive agenda for our people or what it looks like. You can just, again, Google the Black Futures Lab. It's co-led by our sister, Alicia Garza. And those are some things that I think in terms of tools that you can do immediately. So again, donate. There's two resources right here, Collective PAC, Color of Change. Go research Black Futures Lab to look at the agenda, give them some money as well if you got a couple other dollars left over. And then lastly, and this may be somewhat of a bold idea, I think it's truly time for us to look at coalescing our collective political power to start our own political party. As Pastor Mike just alluded to, we have been told for a very long time by a lot of different people and promised by a lot of different people a wide variety of different things. And I don't mean necessarily a third party, another Republican or Democrat party, but I think we've seen different fashions across the country, whether that's the Jewish community, whether there are members who, people who are Irish, whether there are people who are Latino or Latinx. We've seen a wide variety of people coalesce and use their collective voting power to make a statement as a voting bloc. I think it is important and imperative that Black people do the same. If you like, you can go and check out my Instagram page today. There was a soft launch for something called Our Black Party. So you can look that up on Instagram or social or any social media site, or www.ourblackparty.org. And it is essentially a vehicle for us to be able, again, to organize, as Pastor Mike was alluding to, and for us to support other initiatives that will allow us to take back, reclaim, and emphasize our political power. We don't have to beg anyone else to do for us what we can do for ourselves. We don't have to beg these elected officials to go and do something for us when we can do them. And when people get into positions of power, specifically people who look like us, we have to have a vehicle to support them. I say this as a Black elected official. It is one of the most difficult and challenging things that you will ever have to do, because our people can be some of the hardest on us out of anybody in the world. You have to be Superman, Superwoman, Super Negro at all times and be at every place to fulfill every need and think of every policy. And a lot of us aren't necessarily equipped to do those things. And I believe that it's time for us to organize and mobilize in conjunction with our partners to be able to develop a vehicle to say, hey, brother, hey, sister, or however you identify, let's support you, let's coalesce around you, and let's show you how to do it, while not taking your vote or your responsibility to our people for granted. So again, I encourage everybody to look up Our Black Party. Again, we're in the soft launch stage that just came out today, but also support these organizations. My brother Rashad, my sister Stephanie, both Stephanies for that matter, Pastor Mike, and again, major kudos to Reverend Green for all of the phenomenal work that he's doing, as well as Allen Cathedral. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bellamy. And I will throw it to Steph.
Thanks. So when my husband Quentin and I started the collective in 2016, we definitely didn't think that it would become the organization that it has to be a vehicle for change through the political process for Black people. And so for that, I want to just give all glory to God. I think that it's important that we center God in this moment and in this space. And I'm, again, so grateful to Allen Cathedral for giving us this platform and opportunity. This yesterday and today, we've launched our Vote to Live campaign as a collective, where we are focused on registering 250,000 Black people across the country to vote. We know that in the states of Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, Michigan, over 1 million Black people are not registered to vote. And we have so many Black people who were registered to vote in 2016 who didn't. And we saw how that election turned out. And so in this election, it's not just about the president. It really is about the folks that we are voting for on a local and state level, the people that are dictating what happens on our daily lives, the lawmakers who will decide so much of our future. And so I encourage people to go to votetolive.org to see how you can become a part of that effort. I'm proud to say we're partnering with the Conference of National Black Churches that on our
Okay, so it looks like Steph she's frozen. I don't know if that's just for me, but she just said she's working in the Conference of National Black Churches. And those are all the mainline African-American denominations, from A.M.Es to CMEs to A.M.E Zions to the Kojics and Baptists. And we might have lost her. I don't know. So if she comes back, great. But I'll take it from here as we start to wrap up. So I couldn't agree more. There's so much for all of us to do. There's so many ways to tap in. So no one should ever have to feel like, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to get started. One place you can also come is When We All Vote, Mrs. Obama's voting rights organization, or voter registration and education organization. And we'd love to have you come and join our work. We are nonpartisan, so we can't go too deep into issues, but we focus on changing the culture around voting. Next Friday, we will have a partnership with the Roots Picnic. We'd like you to join that. Everybody on this panel, we'd love for you to stop by virtually at 8 p.m. It'll be on YouTube. But most importantly, you can come and help us change the culture around voting by becoming a voting squad captain or partnering your organization with our work. We look forward to bringing as many people into the fold as possible, because it's going to take each and every one of us to really move this country forward. And I just want to flag too that it was fewer than 80,000 votes that determined the last election. And that's just not a lot, split up between 3 states, including over 10,000 in Michigan. And I think some of these people on this panel right now probably have more Instagram followers than that. So at the end of the day, we're not talking about a lot of people. We're talking about first registering, mobilizing, and organizing, and then pushing folks to the polls. So we're going to need literally all hands on deck, from the churches to the HBCUs to organizations like Color of Change. Everyone has a role that they can play here. So please visit us at whenweallvote.org. And as I think we have a little bit more time just for a final thought. And I think it'd be great to have a word of encouragement. I think we said a lot. And I do feel that a lot of people get overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. So we gave people a lot of ways to take action. But Pastor Mike, if you'd like to give us a final thought, an inspirational message, that'd be great.
Dr. King says that we must be ambulance drivers, people who are running through red lights to signal the emergency that is upon us, and never relenting to the kind of advisement to slow down, wait, be paralyzed by the elixir of incrementalism. So I would just tell you, keep running through those red lights. Do not fall into hopelessness or despair. Hopelessness is as deadly as a bullet. Remember that our ancestors are living through us. They are shouting through our mouths. They are thinking through our brains. They are working through our hands. and they had much less than we have to work with today. And so we can indeed do greater works than them through the power of our ancestors, the ingenuity of the gifts that are among us. And so to all of you that are freedom fighters, that love the liberation struggle, I would tell you that it is in your hands. It is in our hands. And we have it within us to literally change the course of this country. Look out in the streets and see this moment, this Pentecostal moment, when you see and hear the good news being proclaimed in many different languages. The Spirit is falling. So put your umbrella down and get soaked and drenched, and let's make change happen right here in the now.
Thank you so much, Pastor Mike. And I will wait to fully wrap until Stephen comes in. But I know Rashad and Dr. Bellamy might have a word of encouragement as well. I know it's hard to follow Pastor Mike because he is a pastor and he laid it out there pretty clearly. Yeah. Oh, Stephen says he is here, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I would just say I think it's imperative that we remain patient with people, but impatient with progress. People come along on their own time, and we have to keep in mind that everyone has a different starting point. But progress is something that we must consistently and continuously push for. So let's keep that in mind. We can love all of our brothers and sisters, and we can love the sin out of them. And it's important, again, for us to continue moving. I would encourage everyone also, I just got a text message that if I don't say this, I'm gonna get beat up. So please make sure we support the Black Millennial Political Convention. You can look us up at bmcmovement.org. Follow us on social media, BMC Movement. And I don't want to get in any trouble. I love you all and I appreciate you.
I'll just say that thank you for having me, and also just you should follow all these folks. I have such tremendous respect for Stephanie, for Dr. Bellamy, for Pastor Mike. Color of Change and Live Free work together a lot on the ground around district attorney work, and his leadership and the sort of thoughtfulness that he brings to the intersection of all these issues. Just continue, folks, to follow folks, local leaders in your community, national organizations, be part of something. Individuals alone can't solve these problems, but collectively we can build the power to change the rules. And this moment, this inflection moment that presents a real opportunity to go forward is going to require all of us to do more, to think bigger and to push harder. And so I hope that we're all ready for it, because I do believe that as we are talking about this work on Juneteenth, there is sort of no better day to remember that there's so much sacrifice that comes before us, and there's so much that we can still sacrifice to make the future generations have things that we couldn't imagine.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to Allen Cathedral African Methodist Episcopal Church. Thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. This was an amazing moment to talk about how we can work together to build political power. I think the key word or phrase here is work together, and we all have to work together to do that. And I think one final thought is that we are the change that we literally have been waiting for. It's up to each and every one of us to do our part. So as you all leave this moment, I hope that everyone is inspired and ready to do their part. And I'd love to turn it over to my soror and one of the pastors of Allen Cathedral, Reverend Elaine Flake. Reverend Flake? Reverend Flake?
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
To everyone, thank you so much. This has been an amazing experience. And just know that we so appreciate your availability and your willingness to share with us on this day.
Thank you so much.